then I'll actually switch gears and take us to the element of the need for the private sector to actually start driving economic growth. But then there is the constraint, access to credit. And we are currently having the conversation in Parliament with regards to the finance bill, the rate cap. Razia, it's a tight position. Treasury has actually come out and said we really do need a review of this based on XYZ, and they're certainly justified. But then on the flip side, the legislators have come again and said we are not amending this. So rather than asking you whether the rate cap will go or not, my question to you is this: if the rate cap remains, what else can be done, or what more can the private sector do to be able to still drive private sector growth without necessarily depending on credit if the rate cap remains?
So there are two ways of looking at this. One is the whole emphasis has been on the rate of credit growth. Credit growth is taking place. There is credit being extended in the economy. Okay. But the problem is that the existence of the rate cap makes everyone that much more risk averse. So if you're a new startup, if you're an SME with no proven track record, you have a bigger burden to take on, where it's going to be that much more difficult to access the financing that's needed. Okay. And it's those elements of any economy that tend to be more dynamic that lead to the future growth. Right. So the loan rate cap, whatever anyone says about it, is hurting the Kenyan economy where it matters most. It is hurting the Kenyan economy in terms of job creation because of the contribution by SMEs in particular to employment. It is hurting the Kenyan economy in terms of that natural dynamism and the entrepreneurial spirit that Kenya is known for. It has that, but what can be done with spirit alone when the capital isn't there to back it up? So there is a question, with courts having called into having focused on the legality of the loan rate cap. And it is unequivocally a negative for the Kenyan economy. Okay. No one has benefited from much cheaper financing. We know the world over that when you try to fix the price of something, the quantity adjusts. It's one of the first things they teach us in economics. That rule doesn't change wherever you are in the world. Right. So there may be an issue where the cost of financing does need to be addressed, but it's also the case that there are probably more favourable ways of addressing this rather than a hard loan rate cap. What we do know is that it's hurt the Kenyan economy, it's unnecessary. People should think about the damage that it's caused.
And we all agree, but Razia, the question is, for instance, if I play devil's advocate, if that rate cap remains, because Parliament was in session yesterday and all the MPs had the same conversation. They said, this cannot be removed, it's going to be very expensive, and they said on the converse, the banks are still making money. So I mean, there's the good and the bad of the rate cap, and I stand with you, but then the question is, if the rate cap is not removed or it's not amended, Razia, would the economy still keep growing at 6%, 5.5 to 6%? Would Kenya still remain a good investment case for any global investor if that rate cap remains?
The question one would put or one would raise in this circumstance is, if financial institutions are a considerable part of the formal tax base, if banks pay their taxes, is it such a bad thing that they're profitable?
And the final question on Kenya. So we're looking at a few issues with regards to economic reforms that are required by the government, and certainly the private sector needs to do slightly more and hopefully access credit if the rate cap changes. But what is the final thing that we can look at with regards to investor sentiment? If you're looking at equities, if you're looking at fixed income assets in the Kenyan economy over the next 3 to 5 years, would you say the sentiment is bullish? Would now be a good time to buy because prices have actually come off?
There has to be a great deal of certainty around the sustainability of growth. Okay. So if investors were looking to a certain event, for example, some moderation of the loan rate cap as it currently exists, and thinking, well, that could be a very positive reform, that could be the trigger for much more meaningful growth going forward, then there would be a reason, fundamental rationale for being more positive on Kenyan equities, for example. You would expect growth in the economy to be lifted. That would be good news for the Kenyan economy. What happens in the absence of these positive reforms? Is it just a case of muddle along? Is it a case of take whatever growth rate might be achievable? There is actually a need to look very clearly at the longer term drivers of growth. The Big Four initiative, to the extent that it looks specifically at the funding that might be available, is a great step in the right direction. Kenya will, of course, see the benefit of its infrastructure spend over time.
Right.
We should not forget that that contributes to growth as well. But ultimately, it's the way people feel about future prospects. Do they have confidence? That is a big driver of investment decisions.
Certainly.
And the growth that comes about.
Okay, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, Razia. Do you have anything else that you will want to capture with regards to talking about the economic outlook of Kenya that we may not have captured in our earlier conversation?
Right now, the world economy faces a great deal of uncertainty. And Kenya has been more privileged in the sense that if you look at foreign investment into the domestic market, it doesn't account for a great deal. There isn't that much exposure. And therefore, it's fairly insulated from some of those very significant pressures that could come about. That said, Kenya should always be looking to reform from a position of strength. While growth is strong, look to put in place the reforms that will secure future growth, that will create and even strengthen the argument for sustained growth in the future.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. There you have it, looking at the investment case for Kenya from a macro perspective. It looks like we're not in a very bad place, but we certainly need to look out for economic reforms. Some of these reforms that we need to look out for would be with regards to the rate cap, at least so that we can be able to have a bit more certainty as far as the debt is concerned for this country, and secondly, the economic growth rates on a medium-term basis. Thank you for joining us once again. We will be running live tomorrow, same time, 2:30, and that is Markets Today on our Metropole page, on Facebook or on YouTube. Good afternoon.